The Source engine is home to some of the best and most skill-expressive movement in all of gaming, and Team Fortress 2 is unsurprisingly no different. Rocket jumping is TF2's premier movement tech, and in the last 16 years, rocket jumping has shown itself to have an unbelievably high skill ceiling. And as you can imagine, when there's a game with super high skill ceiling, people start to compete with each other. Rocket jumping became a speedrun game, where people would compete to get the best times on maps that they possibly could. And as the interest in rocket jumping grew, leaderboards started to spring up, and people started grinding to be the best in the business. But for the longest time, there was a player who held that best in the business title, and he was almost completely unchallenged for a very long time. One player sat in the first place spot on the leaderboards for 6 years before finally being dethroned. And the reason as to why he lost his rank 1 title is a lot more complicated and a lot more nefarious than you might expect. So this is the story of the greatest rocket jumper of all time, and his name was Boshy. Boshy's jumping career first started out playing on an old Russian jump server, just, playing for fun and getting the hang of things. People joining jump servers just for fun is incredibly common, because rocket jumping is just as useful in-game as it is on a jump server. But one day, a friend he met on this server, named Sunrise, told him about a whole new set of servers called Tempest. And the Tempest servers is where the competitive leaderboards are. Each individual map has its own leaderboard, where the world record time is at the top and everyone is racing to try and beat it. But Tempest also has a global leaderboard. Just beating a map will get you points, and beating the bonus jumps that you often see at the end of maps also gives you points. Harder maps and bonuses give more points than easier ones, and getting top 10 times and world records gives you even more points on top of that. And the more points you have, the higher you place on the global leaderboard. And within just 3 years of playing Tempest, our player Boshy had reached the global rank 1 spot, a title that he would keep for the next 6 years. His first ever world record was achieved in 2015 on a map called Jump.tf. It was an okay record for the time, but it was beaten just a few days later by a player named G.O.A.T. But years later, Boshy would take back this world record with a 1 minute 27 time. But this first world record would obviously not be the last, because Boshy had claimed over 300 world records at the height of his career. And to single out certain runs in the career of a player with that many records is obviously very difficult. But he did have some standout runs that were seen as completely unbelievable at the time they were achieved. He had a run on a map called Jump.tf. This map is very old and very prestigious, so competition on this map was incredibly fierce. For a long time, Boshy already had the world record with a 2 minute 22 second time, and this run was seen as pretty much completely flawless. He doesn't fail any of the jumps, and his strats through the connectors seemed impossible to optimize. But then, in June of 2020, Boshy got a 2 minute 18 second time, beating his old record by almost 4 seconds. And people were wondering, where the hell did Boshy get these 4 seconds from? Well, it was simple. Boshy had discovered a new strat. The old world record looked like this. You do the 19th jump, then you land on the teleport trigger to get to the next jump, then you do that jump and get to the last jump. But Boshy's new run had a much different strat. The new world record looked like this. Boshy had found a way to maintain his speed through the teleport trigger of the 19th jump into the 20th one, which skipped the jump entirely. Boshy also has an incredible run on Jump Apex. Apex being yet another incredibly prestigious map to hold the world record on. It's one of the most popular maps in the game, but it's also one of the more challenging maps. You see, jump maps are classified with a tier system. Tier 1 maps are the easiest maps there are, and tier 6 maps are the hardest. Jump Apex was a tier 5 map, meaning that getting a flawless run on it is much harder than on a tier 2 or 3 map like the ones we've just talked about. Boshy did an offline run, not on the Tempest servers, and he got a record of 4 minutes and 13 seconds on Jump Apex. The online record you'll find on Tempest is 4 minutes and 31 seconds. That's 18 seconds slower than the offline world record. The online record is, of course, also held by Boshy. The offline Apex record is completely completely flawless, and it also does some faster and more risky strats that the online one doesn't manage to go for. Like doing this wall sync from the connector here. This skips a very slow but much safer B-hop strat that the online run chooses to go for instead. There's also this incredibly clean strat that surfs up this tiny little ramp to maintain all of his speed through the connectors between jumps. It's overall an incredibly optimized run that borders perfection. Having it be an offline time is incredibly unfortunate really, because it means it doesn't show up when you look for it on the leaderboards, but it's still a crazy run that does a great job at displaying Boshy's incredibly high skill level. There were also jump tournaments held by the community, where all of the best players would fight each other for the best possible runs in the allotted time period, and the player with the best run at the end of the time period would win. There was the beginnings tournaments, which Boshy would compete in, and beginnings 5 and 6, Boshy won every single rocket jump map in the entire tournament. There was also the Tempest Cup, which Boshy was also incredibly dominant in. But on top of all these tournament wins, and all of these world records achieved, he was also inventing new strats that would change the way the game was played. Like this strat on Jump Speed 2. Going for a sync at the start of this jump was significantly easier and more consistent to do. And this jump might not look that impressive to the untrained eye, but it's one of the most precise jumps in the entire game. A jump that would be a choke point for everyone's runs. This map actually had 0 completions on Tempest, all because of this jump. The rest of the map is incredibly easy, everything except this part. And Boshy was the first person to ever beat the map online, and he did so with a time of 9 minutes and 57 seconds. Boshy was also a key component in creating what's called an angled B-hop. In jump maps, whenever you fail a level, you always get teleported back to the start. The person who made the map put a teleport trigger wherever they don't want you to be able to stand. So whenever you fail, you're always sent back to the start. But on some teleport triggers, you can actually bunny hop off the floor without being teleported back. You have to press a jump input at the exact moment that you hit the ground. The timing window is just a 60th of a second. This is a very common strat in maps, so common that some harder maps actually bake them into the jump intentionally. But this only works when falling from certain heights. Falling from slightly too high or slightly too low will make the B-hop impossible to hit. So Boshy came up with the idea of an angled B-hop. You can use a console command to show you the exact angle that you're aiming at. You can then use this to create setups where you fall from the exact same height every single time, which means you can get B-hops off of basically any surface that allows them, regardless of the height of the platform you're actually walking off. Boshy was also the first person to hit this absolutely obscene strat on one of the bonus jumps in Jump When, where you hit 8 jump bugs in a row before pogoing to the end of the level. For those unaware, a jump bug is basically the exact same thing as a B-hop, but you have to uncrouch a 60th of a second before hitting the B-hop, making it 2 precise inputs instead of just 1. So that's 16 essentially frame-perfect inputs back to back, just to make this ridiculous strat work. And this strat is now the strat used in the world record for the bonus. Boshy was also the first person to beat a lot of jumps that were considered tier 0. Jumps that were considered impossible to complete. He was the first to beat bonus 3 on Jump Armature, which uses some spicy sauce jank to get stuck briefly where these textures meet, then do a sync off of it to go through a tiny hole in the ceiling. He was also the first player to beat a map called Jump Homie, a map that is incredibly difficult for Soldier. Both Armature and Homie are intended for the Demo Man class to beat, which is why it requires so much strange frame-perfect jank to complete as Soldier. Boshy was without a doubt changing the game. He of course wasn't alone in doing this. There are many insane players doing crazy things in their own right, but Boshy was always on top. He had the most records by far, and his records were often seen as close to unbeatable. But after almost 6 years of being at the top of his game, Boshy was about to fall from his top spot. And in rather poetic fashion, the only thing that could take down Boshy was Boshy. You see, Boshy became an admin on Tempest, because just like any community server you could possibly imagine, there needs to be admins. People to maintain the server, to ban people for breaking the rules, and add new maps and stuff like that. For a very long time, Boshy was the only active admin on the server. There were other admins, but they had become increasingly less active, to the point where anything that needed doing was being done by Boshy on his own. But the way Boshy used his admin powers was starting to be called into question, and for good reason. Boshy would have a final say on what strats were and were not allowed on Tempest. Something that would usually be discussed by an entire team of admins was being handled solely by him, and parts of the community strongly questioned some of his decisions. Most infamously, there was a strat on a map called Jump House Beta. This is a map that is incredibly old and janky, and at the start of Course 2, there was a big green box, and to get past this jump you had to pogo in place inside of this box for 30 seconds straight. And this was of course a part of the run that most people considered to be incredibly boring, both to watch and to play. People found a strat to skip this, essentially allowing you to wait out your 30 seconds in the start zone of the map instead of in the green box. And as long as you jumped into the green box right as your 30 seconds ended, you'd get tellied to the next jump. Boshy decided this strat wasn't allowed. It was abusing an exploit, so he used his admin permissions to make the strat impossible. And some people strongly disliked this decision, and they also perceived it as him protecting his own world records, since he was the person who held the record before this strat was discovered. But there were other people that thought the decision was fair. It was an exploit after all, an exploit that was arguably much harder to perform offline than it was online. And the longer an admin leaves this sort of decision unmade, the worse the problem gets, because he has more times to delete if he decides to remove the strat. So a forum post sprouted up on Jump.tf of people speaking about the decision that was made. Some people agreed, and a lot of people disagreed. And there were many such cases as this, the community disliking his admin decisions. But people that supported Boshy would argue that these decisions could be chalked up to an admin doing what he thinks is right for the server. And even if he makes the wrong choice sometimes, he's still trying his best on his own. You could never conclusively prove that he had an ulterior motive. But there were other things he'd done with his admin permissions. Things that happened long before the green box strat was ever found. One runner named Larry took one of Boshy's world records on a map called Jump Zekro in 2017. Boshy's response to this happening was to ban Larry from Tempest for as long as it took for Boshy to get the world record back. Boshy also had a history of taking it quite personally when his records were taken. Whenever someone would take a world record that he was particularly fond of, he would unfriend that person on Steam, ban them from his Twitch chat, and they would be in-game muted for a period of time on the Tempest servers. Also, if we go back to the green box thing again, this exploit was banned on Boshy's say-so, but other such strats that could easily be considered glitches or bugs were left on the table. Things like the aptly named spook skip on Jump Devils. There's a little trigger that puts your character into a spooked state for a few seconds on one of the jumps, and there's an exploit that allows you to skip this trigger by landing on the edge right here, and then glitching your head into the ceiling with a thing called a head bug. That head bug allows you to touch a telly trigger that takes you to the next jump. This strat was not banned by Boshy, so a lot of people in the community perceived that as him just making up the rules as he went along, so long as it benefited himself. The community was divided. Some people thought Boshy's decisions were fair, and others didn't. But despite which side of the coin you landed on, all of this drama had raised people's suspicion about Boshy. So when people started digging, they found something else. Players found Boshy in an empty Tempest server, changing the start and end zones to one of the bonuses on a map. In this footage, he is essentially changing the start line and the finish line of a level. So imagine it like a 100-meter race. Boshy's start line is slightly further forward, and his finish line is slightly further back. These changes would only save him about a 20th of a second, but when competing for the fastest times in the world, a 20th of a second is more than enough to beat a world record. After beating the world record with the changed start and end zones, he would change them back again, making it harder for future players to ever challenge his world record. Boshy had officially been caught cheating on Tempest. At first, he was caught cheating just a couple of bonuses, most notably on bonus 2 of Jump Gaylord. Yes, that is what the map's called. It doesn't matter, okay? This is a picture of the starting zone of bonus 2. The green line is how the zones were when the map was first added to Tempest. The blue line is what the zone is like after Boshy got his world record. And the red line is the zone when Boshy got his world record. And this is the end zone. The green line is the original zone, and the blue blue line is what the zone was changed to look like after Boshy got his run. This was smoking gun evidence. With the video of him changing the zones and the historical data of what zones used to look like, he was caught red-handed. But this was not the end of it. There was also this infamous example of cheating on a bonus for Jump vanished. Tempest has teleport commands that allow for easy practicing of certain jumps and strats. If you type /s in the chat, it saves your location, and /t teleports to that save point. But usually when you do this, it turns off your timer, because obviously you don't want people setting times using this server command. But when you have admin permissions on the server, you can use these commands as much as you want, and your timer will stay active. So Boshy used this to cheat a random B-hop strat. Remember how we talked about B-hops earlier, and you need to fall from a certain height to make it work? Well, sometimes, unfortunately enough, the fastest strat on a jump will be to go for a random B-hop. Essentially throw yourself at the floor and hope you fell from the right height to get a B-hop from. And then on top of that, you actually have to time the input correctly. This is certainly doable as a strat, especially for a player of this caliber, but it's incredibly tedious to grind, and you're literally just hoping the randomness gods smile your way. But Boshy knew he could get this world record. He just didn't want to grind for it. So he instead used no-clip to teleport into the right spot above the ground where he knows a B-hop is possible. Then he typed /s. He would then play the bonus as normal and fall towards where his save point was. He would then try his best to make it look like he was going for a random B-hop, but in reality, he would teleport to his save point and get the B-hop almost guaranteed. When you slow this down, it looks incredibly obvious, but the hope was that it's just some random bonus no one cares about, so no one's ever gonna check or notice. And for a long time, that was true. But after his cheating was noticed in the first place, this one was uncovered too. He admitted to cheating the jumps that he'd been caught out on, but then even more was revealed on top of that he never admitted to. He then confessed to cheating those too, and then it happened again. As it turned out, the undisputed best player in the world had just been outed as the most prolific cheater in rocket jumping history. You might be wondering how it took so long for him to be caught. Why was he not caught sooner if his cheating was so prolific? Well, Boshy had taken measures to cover up his cheating. Whenever you join a jump server and set a time, the database updates automatically. But if people are suspicious of your time for one reason or another, people want to have a way to check if your run was legitimate or not. So the servers have this neat thing called Source TV. It's essentially a spectator plugin that records the server constantly. And whenever a world record is set, it takes a chunk of that recording called a demo and it puts it into the database alongside the record. If you want to request a demo of a certain run or a certain time frame on a server, then you can do that. But Boshy, without anybody knowing, had been using a glitch in the system to decouple the Source TV recording from some of his times. He didn't do this every single time he cheated, but he did it a large number of times, making it much harder to check and verify his runs as being legitimate. At first, Boshy was banned for 3 months for the cheating that had been discovered, and he was also stripped of 100% of his admin privileges. But this was only after the first wave of cheating was actually found out. After even more was uncovered, his ban was extended. But Boshy was still the only active admin at the time, so stripping his admin privileges meant that new admins had to be sworn in to be able to pick up where he left off. And those new admins were now left to investigate Boshy's cheating allegations. And eventually, Boshy admitted to one of the current admins that he had cheated more bonuses than he could even count. And he had also cheated a handful of course times too, like course 3 on Jump Straight or course 1 on Jump Sleepy. So when the new admins finally had full access to the database and their admin permissions, Boshy's entire Tempest profile was wiped. Every single time he had ever set was wiped from the leaderboards permanently, and he was banned for another 6 months on top of that. In total, he was banned for 18 months. And this was a very contentious decision. The decision to keep him banned for longer was not contentious at all, but people questioned the decision to wipe his times from the leaderboard, because that decision was made quite a long time after he'd been caught cheating. He hadn't been playing the game for a long while. It also meant that a large number of legitimate records that were incredibly impressive had just randomly vanished from the leaderboard, and some people didn't like that the admins had been so scorched earth in their approach. In another Jump.tf forum post, the lead admin doubled down on their decision. In the post, the admin alleges that Boshy had quite literally cheated in every way that can be detected from what what we have. So the logic was that we have no idea how many times he may have cheated in ways that are truly undetectable. He even used a super basic weapon swap cheat that had gone unmentioned by anyone up until this point. This is a banned exploit that involves changing loadouts mid-jump to allow yourself to fire extra rockets faster than normal. The logic of the admins is that when someone cheats this frequently, innocent until proven guilty just stops applying, because a speedrun leaderboard is inherently built on trust, and if a player can no longer be trusted, then none of their times should be considered legit. And as much as people understand the logic behind this decision, it was clear to everyone that many of Boshy's times, including the most impressive ones, were very clearly legitimate. Suddenly players on Tempest were fighting for second place because a world record on the server might be slower than the true world record that had been wiped from the leaderboard. But to this day, Boshy's times are still wiped on Tempest, and there's no intention to have them reinstated. Now, it wouldn't be right to make a video like this without actually talking to the person that the video is about. So I did reach out to Boshy to talk about the entire thing. He said a ton of very insightful things, a lot of which has already been said in this video. But perhaps most notably is that he confessed to me exactly why he cheated. So in his own words, this is why Boshy cheated. It was basically the feeling of entitlement that led me this path. At this point in time, I was super dominant on Tempest, haven't lost map world records in nearly 2 years, and that really got into my head, so I tried expanding my dominance onto courses and bonuses. However, as you can imagine, some courses and bonuses were a lot more RNG heavy than any map run would ever be. Long story short, I got upset that I couldn't beat some random's time quickly, ended up editing the zones to beat it, and was pretty much abusing admin for similar things. It got into my head. I felt entitled to those times because I had the skill to get them, and I ended up cheating. The thing that struck me the most about what he said is that this is a shockingly common story when it comes to cheating in anything, from speedrunning all the way to sports. The best players in the world reach the top of their game, and they know they could get any world record they could possibly want just so long as they grinded for it. But they just can't be bothered to do the grind. So they cheat because they feel like they deserve the run anyway, despite the fact that they're unwilling to grind for it. He told me that he never cheated any full map runs, only bonuses and courses, but because of the wipe, there's no doubt that any cheated times remain anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But just because Boshy can't compete on the leaderboards anymore, that doesn't mean he's stopped playing the game. In fact, on Saturday the 8th of July, about a week before this video was uploaded, there was a little for fun jump tournament being held where a bunch of European players made some teams and fought for the fastest times on their maps. Boshy was one of the players in this tournament, and perhaps unsurprisingly, he completely trounced everyone with a more than 20-second lead on second place. Players in this tournament had 25 minutes to set the best time possible. Boshy's very first time was a 2:21, a time that no one even got close to, and then right at the end of the 25 minutes, he got a 2:17, a time that is only 2.5 to 3 seconds off of the world record run of the map. And that was the time that he won his tournament bracket with. And in practicing for this tournament, he beat the current world record by half a second. So despite everything that's happened, you could still quite easily call Boshy the greatest player of all time. But in talking to Boshy, he also said that when his ban is over, he does plan on returning to Tempest. He'll just be a little less serious about the whole jumping thing. So Boshy's story isn't quite over yet. He'll be back when his ban is over in the end of August. And whether or not his return will be a redemption arc, only time can really tell. Hi. This video is a little bit different from the sort of thing I usually make. And having said that, I tried my hardest to be as objective as possible throughout the entire thing. Because I'm not trying to paint anyone as a villain or start a witch hunt, but I'm also not trying to diminish what happened either. I tried my hardest to just state the facts as they happened. And I hope I did as good a job as I possibly can at that. But I would like to thank Boshy for responding to me after I reached out to him. He said some incredibly insightful things, and I can't thank him enough for it. Also, a huge thanks to players called Tev, Porky, and Warped, community members that helped me tremendously with some of the behind the scenes stuff of this video. I tried my hardest to be as impartial as possible so that you, the viewer, can make up your own minds. But if you liked this style of video, then let me know with all of the, YouTube algorithm stuff. There'll also be a bunch of relevant links left down in the description. Boshy's story, in my head, is quite a fascinating one, because a low-level player cheating is highly unsurprising. interesting. They can't achieve the things great players can, so they have to cheat to get it. But the motivations behind a higher level player cheating, to me at least, are far more interesting. Thanks for watching.